Here we go. A little intro. And we're back. Stripe Show podcast on a Monday. I'm your host, Travis Fulton. Thank you for making us part of your day. It's Thanksgiving week. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. Stripe Show podcast brought to you by Encore Golf. Again, if you haven't played the Vero X1, go check it out. EncoreGolf.com/Travis Fulton. We'll be coming at you here today, Tuesday and Wednesday on the Stripe Show podcast. We're going to take Thursday and Friday off, then we'll come back the following week, finish strong through the holidays in December. Got a great lineup for you. You're not going to want to miss coaches, players, analysis coming at you all winter long. We're here to help your game. As many of you know, I was out in Scottsdale this last week participating in an event called College Showcase, which will be on Golf Channel. Mark it down, December 17th at 7 p.m. December 17th. No, wait, I got that wrong. December 15th at 7 p.m. College Showcase, December 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern on Golf Channel. Don't miss it. It's a great event. We had 4 of the top male players in college and 2 of the top female players. They played this really cool event for charity with 2 celebrity captains, Jerome Bettis and Rob Riggle. And the level of golf was just through the roof. It really was. You're not going to want to miss it. It's really cool. So check that out. Did some stuff with PXG. As many of you know, I'm moving over and being a troop with PXG in 2022. Super excited about that. We got some content coming your way that you won't want to miss. And of course, before we bring our guest in, make sure you like the podcast. Leave us a comment and a rating. We're climbing the charts. Top 5 is our goal into next year. So we'll appreciate you being here. Let's get right to it. A guy that, we were here, let's see, in Ponte Vedra probably 4 or 5 months ago. We did some videos for his site, Eric Cogorno, just like the pizza, right, as he said. And he joins me here from South Florida. How you doing, buddy?
Everything's good, Travis. It's cool to listen to you intro in here, man. You're like a pro with that mic in there, dude. Everything's good.
Eric Cogorno Golf. Go check it out on YouTube. He pumps out a ton of great content, lots of great teachers. We did one. It's a lot of fun. He's also on Instagram at Eric Cogorno, EricCogorno. Lots that I want to get to, Eric. There's a lot of movement in professional golf here as we kind of wrap up the season. I just saw on Twitter Brooks Koepka signed with Srixon, which is really interesting. Lots of changes for Brooks Koepka. No longer with his longtime coach, Claude Harmon III, now in new equipment. We're going down this path again with a top level player. Of course, he's playing Bryson DeChambeau coming up this week in the match presented by Capital One. But none bigger than when Tiger Woods decides the post. And Tiger Woods probably won the entire Player Impact Program incentive with one simple iron post of a swing, and I quote, making progress. What it looked like to you?
It's funny. I was looking, Travis, before we came on. I think there's 3 million views he got on that in the past 24 hours. And I'm sure you, like me and a lot of the listeners, who I follow is so golf orientated. There's like maybe 10 or 20 personal people, and then it's golf, 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 golf. So I'm sure your feed, like mine, was literally just like 100 reposts of his swing. Listen, I think a couple of things, man. Number one, anytime Tiger Woods does anything golf related, super good for us, good for the game of golf, good for people, good for interest. So from that perspective, I love it. I think whether someone personally likes or doesn't like Tiger, you have got to respect, the grit, the determination, the mental fortitude he has to even swing, right? I mean,
right.
What I think his accident was in February, earlier this year. And at that point in time, our conversations, at least amongst like my friends and I, were like, is he going to swing again? We don't know, let alone play on the tour or win a tournament or anything. So I think first things first, we have to be enthusiastic, optimistic about that. And the swing itself, I spent a couple of minutes looking at it. Like, it looks great,
Yeah.
like from a mechanic standpoint. I think it looks really good. I think it looks like it did before he got injured. It looked really good this past year. Um, I'm not a doctor by any means. I looked a little bit at what his injury was and what some of the people said. I think, as a nice iron swing on the range and, a tour event are worlds apart.
Yeah.
I think with the trail leg in particular, I would be interested in seeing as his clubs get longer and his speed goes up. That to me, I'm guessing, but I mean, I would think where that would maybe come into play the most. I would think as the clubs get shorter and the speed goes down, Travis, it would be less of an issue. But I'd be curious to see as he starts to pump some speed in what it looks like.
Yeah, I think how fast can Tiger get back to swinging the driver is going to be probably the most interesting thing to me, as far as shaping the plane and knowing where the club face is and matching it up to the path and flighting it, those kinds of things. I don't really worry about that with Tiger so much. And I agree. I think his swing looked probably the most like it did when he did get injured. I think there was probably more play in the change of knee flex. At least that's the first thing that jumped out at me, was just how aggressive his right hip was turning back. And you could see the right knee losing some flexion. You could see that little window open up between the left knee and the right knee. Now, some of that's camera angle too, but I do think that change of knee flex will be very much present in his swing. And I think it'll be really interesting, considering coming back, how fast can Tiger swing the club? Because I think that'll determine how competitive he'll be. Can he get the club head speed up to 115 to 120? I think it'll be interesting to see. And I don't think anyone really knows. We'd just be speculating based off of what that injury to be. But my goodness, it looked good to see him standing up there. What was it? 200. And I think someone tweeted out 271 days when he got in the wreck to he's standing there hitting golf balls. So really cool to see. I want to ask you this.
Incredible.
You think of Tiger's swings over the years. There was his young swing, of course, when he came out and he started with Butch. And then he took on a pretty good swing change with Hank Haney, Butch Harmon, of course. I say these names like everyone knows, but Butch Harmon, Hank Haney. And then he left Hank and took on some even more, I thought, bigger changes, wholesale changes with Sean Foley. And then he left when he came back from the injury. He kind of went with Chris Como, who helped him put some pieces together. So there's like 4 swings there. Now let's call it, here's a 5th perhaps, although I think this one probably will look more like the 4th. Give me your general thoughts of that over the years of Tiger, but then also maybe the one that you like the most.
I think I undoubtedly like the 2000 era move mechanically the most. I actually looked up earlier just out of curiosity, because visually to my eye, that was the move that I liked. And I looked up some of his stats. So you ready for this? In 2000, he won 9 of his 20 events. So 45%, which is kind of what he did under Haney, right? When he was winning a lot. He won. But now check this out, Travis. He was a collective 263 under par. 263 under par. Now his next best year was 180. Next best year is 180. So that's a huge gap in score range. He was hitting at that point. This is like me backing up my opinion here of this 2000 thing. He was hitting 71% of his fairways and 75% of his greens. 71 fairways, 75 greens. Now, people bring up all the time under Haney, his win percentage is a little higher, right? In 2006, he won 53%, 8 of 15 events. I mean, that's just goofy. 2007, he won 7 of 16, but he was only hitting 60% of his fairways. So that dropped like 10%. And now some equipment changes in there too, and his greens and regulation came down a little bit, and he was significantly less under par. So I think when you look at his actual swing, I'm curious to hear your perspective. I think aesthetically, that 2000 move is just incredibly hard to argue against.
Yeah.
And then I think when you look at that, and it's like, all right, not only does it look better, but he performed by the numbers better. it's hard to work against that. And one of the things I think it's interesting with the Koepka piece is like,
Mm.
people say, what got you here won't get you there, right? Like what you've been doing up until now won't get you where you want to go. I think the conversation is always interesting to think, I always say, what if he would have never left Butch? I think that's a common question. What if he would have just kept that swing, and never changed? And you look at guys like Koepka changing, and you just wonder, that move and that flow that he was in at that point in time, without knowing any of the other variables at play, it's just easy to armchair quarterback. But what do you think? I mean, I think that 2000 frame was.
I mean, it's tough to argue with early Tiger. I mean, and look, Butch had the luxury of working with a young body that wasn't beat down, right? I think it's fair to preface it that way. But yeah, I think the young Tiger was just so impressive, so explosive. When you're hitting that rate of fairways and hitting it that far, that much longer than the rest of the field, and then we know he's arguably the greatest iron player of all time and arguably the greatest putter of all time. I mean, like, okay, so now you're going to hit it longer than me and in the fairway? Okay, that's not fair. That's not a fair fight. So, yeah, I think the Butch days would be number one. I think number two for me would probably be, I liked the direction that he went back when he came back with Chris Como. I think getting the width back and, shaping it the way that he did made a lot of sense to me. I think getting that width and the shape and taller to the top of the swing and more loaded into the trail side, I think would be number two. And then I think Hank would probably be right there, number three. I think what's interesting with Hank, and I've talked about this a lot in podcasts when Butch went to Hank, and I've talked to this about with Hank Haney too, is that, he had to get some, he got some rotation in the forearm, he weakened the grip, and they put more loft on the face. And part of that was because of Tiger's knee and that, they didn't want to be so quite aggressive and rotating and posting up and kind of soften the impact, a little more rotation coming through on the other side. So you saw Tiger go from a club face that wasn't as looking at the sky and a shaft that's pointing down the line. You saw it kind of rotating, point maybe a bit more left at the top, the face certainly a bit more open, and then a bit more rotation in the forearm coming through versus this, okay, face is more shut. Let's get out of the way and, post up like we see a lot of players do. So they had to soften that blow and impact. And I think that added loft took a little bit, probably time for Tiger to dial in. But once he dialed it in, it was clearly the right way to go. And he just kind of propelled from there. And to your point, won at a percent that was equivalent to Butch, if not higher. So I think Hank did the right thing and working around some of the injuries that were starting to pop up and doing that. And I think Hank was the right, I think there's one of the things that's really important, Eric. I want to get your thoughts on this. Depending upon what the player is looking for, I think there's certain coaches that are better suited for it. And I think the direction Tiger needed to go with his swing, Hank was perfect for that because that's really how Hank taught, and you could see it in some of his other players. Mark O'Mara hit the ball that way. So I think it was perfect for Hank to kind of fit that role. And then, off they went. And then when he came back, and I think my least favorite swing was with Sean. And then they went, stronger grip, face definitely more shut. And I think that hand path working more in and deep. And when Tiger started kind of dropping, I felt like that's where Tiger lost some of the DNA. Now, put that aside, they still won 5 times. He still got back to number 1 player in the world. But this is just like, this guy, to me, you could almost convince me that you could maybe teach him how to play golf left-handed, and he would still get back to number 1 player in the world.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on all those things. I think Sean probably got Tiger during the worst point, in my opinion, if you combine everything, everything. I think Chris, from my outside perspective, armchair quarterback, did a nice job getting him kind of back to neutral with a lot of things. Yep. I think Butch had the biggest advantage in what he had. Not to discredit what he did, because you know just as good as me, you can mess up a good player just as quickly as you can help. And the Haney thing, I think the numbers don't lie. And you also don't know like what Tiger went in asking for, right? Like what was he looking for? What did he want to do? Because
Right.
you and I have our like, oh, we would probably do this, but without having the conversation of being behind
Yep.
the scenes, it's tough. But yeah, I mean, I think there was points with Sean too where like he was very golf swing, not much play the game when he went to play from is what I thought I
Hmm.
saw at that point. Huge exaggerations in practice swings right before he hit shots type of things. That's usually an indicator, of where you're at with your swing change. So yeah, I think after Chris, him kind of seemingly going on his own and getting back to playing, I thought was the right choice.
Hmm.
I think interestingly enough that maybe his best choice along the way. But I think I just remember when I was growing up and I was idolizing Tiger, he was with Haney. He would pump that driver a mile right so
Yeah.
much.
Right.
And I just kept thinking, man, like, gosh. Now I don't know anything about a golf swing at this point in time. I'm just watching TV on the weekends. But I'm thinking like, man, but then he'd win still,
Yeah.
from the tree line. So that was an interesting
Yeah.
that was an interesting thing to watch, I think.
Well, that club face, I mean, I think it ran its course with Hank, where then the shaft started getting a little laid off at the top, and then the face was probably a little too open, and he just couldn't save it with the longer club, especially when it was teed up.
Yeah.
But then to take that, and then when he came back and go the other way, stronger grip, face more closed. And I think hand path definitely more in. I think he lost some width. I think he started hanging left, and I think he started dropping, and then you're in trouble there. I mean, that's your attack angle with that kind of shaft lean really starts to work down. And, I think there was a point where Tiger was probably hitting down on it 6-7 degrees with his driver. I think there was, you could certainly see it.
You said that like low pull cut.
Yeah. Well, you remember how far left you would aim?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's because your attack angle's so down. I mean, like you're hitting 7 down with your driver, your pass already moving 7 to the right. So now you got to get, yourself going up, foul ball to left field and just try to hit it out that way. And that's what he did.
And you mentioned, Travis, I just want to touch on that because I think it's easy to overlook. Like changing someone's grip and club face alignment is hard. Like if we have an average golfer and it goes from a weak grip open face to a stronger grip, more square face, that's usually pretty beneficial across the board. But when you get to elite level players and you change a grip club face alignment, to go from one to the other is so difficult from my experience. To go from one to the other back to another one within a period of time is like unheard of.
Yeah.
Unheard of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this, and then we'll move on here because I want to talk about this driver versus iron video that you posted, which I think be really interesting for our guests and our listeners here. I heard, and I really enjoy my conversations with Sean. I think he's one of the more brilliant minds in our industry, and he's very thoughtful. And I heard him say a few weeks ago, he was talking with Claude at the Top 100 Summit. And he said, when I was with Tiger, I think I overcoached him. And I think I was too set on maybe a method of teaching. And I thought to myself, like, wow, that's really powerful for a teacher to say that. And I'll say this, like I look back and I've been in that mold too. And I think most of us have probably been certainly critical of that. But I thought that was really fascinating to just be so open about that. And, sure, there was a lot of really good things, but just to say, man, I might have, been too one way oriented. And I go back to, that's why I think, what is the player looking to do? Is specialized as the sport is. I think there's good fits, and I think you're going to see that more and more now. There's just going to be better fits for people. Look, I need to make some technical changes. All right. Well, I think there's guys that are better technically than others. I need to be more of a player, and I need someone to kind of mentor me and talk to me and get me to be more positive. Well, I think there's that more holistic approach, and I think there's people that are better at that. So I think it's just, the fit and the timing is so critical in coaching. Let's move on here. I want to talk about the driver versus the iron video that you posted with Dennis Sales, and kind of give us some cliff notes here of, you posted this video. Here's my driver swing. Here's my iron swing. What's our audience need to know between the two that's kind of fascinating and difference between the two?
Yeah, I think one of the questions that always comes up for us is, is the driver swing the same for the iron swing? Um, of all the YouTube and Instagram comments I get every day, the most common one is this the same for the driver,
Mhm.
right? And I think in a lot of circumstances, the answer is yes, but there's certain things where it's not. I would look at it from a macro level as a player like this. Our priority with the driver is to maximize distance with a predictable ball pattern. Maximize distance with a predictable ball pattern. The priority with an iron is to be specific with distance with a particular ball pattern. So to me, I would go into it those two goals. So with that in mind, if those are the objectives, things are a little bit different, right? And then you couple in the fact that the ball's on the tee versus the ground. So when we have the driver, the ball's teed up, iron ball's on the ground. So inherently, some of the mechanical pieces need to be the same or different rather. So because we're hitting more level to up with the driver versus more down with the iron, there's a few things that are different. I would say, Travis, and I think this is you and I did that driver setup video, which would be a good one for people to watch as well. I forget how you worded that, but having to figure out the forward ball position the way you worded that, I still use.
Mhm.
Anyway, so
Overcome the forward ball position.
overcome the forward ball position. That's it. So driver, to me, there's two main areas that are different. Number one is the setup, and number two is the head location, just to keep it relatively simple. So the setup piece is with the driver, keeping in mind we're trying to maximize distance. The ball's more forward relative to like a torso line. Let's just call it like under lead armpit as a stock. The feet width are wider, and with the feet width being wider, there's more right side bend or tilt of the torso away from the target with the driver. Iron, the ball position, let's just say an 8 iron is more underneath the left ear as a stock measure. The feet are not as wide. So ankles with an iron would be like an 8 iron, like just outside of hips. Driver ankles would be outside of shoulders. Those would be checkpoints I would use for someone. And then there's less tilt. So let's say a driver, a good player, maybe 6 to 10 degrees range, and then an 8 iron they might be 3, 4, 5 with an 8 iron. So there's less tilt. So I would say when you're working with someone, you're working on your game, 80% of it's setup. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the level of play, but I think that it's certainly a huge part for everyone, for sure.
Meaning like 80% of the differences between the iron and the driver.
Oh,
What's it?
yeah. Okay, yeah, right.
Setup related.
Right. Oh, yeah, between the driver and the iron, yeah, 80%.
Yeah. So from there, I think whatever someone, this is so important to me, whatever someone's intention is in their swing should be the same. Meaning, if their club face opens too much during the backswing and they swing too over the top, for example, the feels they have to fix that, they're going to need the same feels for a 9 iron, 7 iron, 5 iron driver.
Right.
All of them. They may need to exaggerate those feels as the clubs get longer, perhaps, but they need the same feels. The only big macro thing that I would coach different would be the head location. If you look after this and someone goes to YouTube, a slow motion face on driver and circles a player's head, any of the great long players that you like, their head's going to typically stay in the circle or move off 1 to 2 inches during the backswing. Most of them will move forward about a half an inch or stay on that location from the top of the backswing until about left arm parallel. But then from left arm parallel through, most of them you'll see a little bit of a back out, usually several inches, like a decent amount, maybe 3, 4 inches. Those players, when you look at their numbers, are the ones that maximize and are as efficient as possible. So whatever club head speed they have, they hit the ball the farthest relative to that club head speed. So an amateur golfer, I think, who swings 80 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, it's much more important that you optimize that distance. But I have so many people that come in for lessons, Travis, and we talk about things. I'm like, listen, driver should be number one priority for a lot of people. If I hit the ball 300 to 310 off the tee and someone comes in, they hit it 220, and I simply gave them my distance and we changed nothing else, most of them handicap would get cut in half, like literally the next day.
Right.
And so I think that's unrealistic for everyone to do that. But I think as much as you can chop off as possible by setting up correctly to hit up on it, and then head back, hips forward, right? Like, so the ability to keep your head back but still have the weight and hips move forward, I think, is the big key. So there's a long answer, but I think all those little details there are important.
Yeah. It seems like, the driver, you'll see them, like you said, they kind of back up There's kind of sitting a little bit more maybe on the trail side, like not all the weight's on the trail side, but there's definitely more there, right? In being behind it. And then the irons, they'll kind of drive that a little bit more forward.
No doubt about that.
So they can catch the ball, then the ground. And this leads into some of the pitfalls that happen with conversation around a professional golfer who's like, okay, I want to hit up on it more. And I know when I hit up that it's worth more distance to me, but I have to be careful that doesn't leak too much into my iron game where I start hanging back and then I start losing control of the face because now my proximity blows up and then it becomes detrimental in the changes that I've made with the driver because they've leaked in my iron game and I've lost that proximity, right? And that's where you've got to be careful to some degree in that, the net effect over here, but then, wow, how do I balance that with the iron? And that's the conversation that you're always trying to have. And that setup amount of tilt, and trying to kind of streamline that from driver to 5-iron to wedge has a lot to do with that. I think we'll see that attack angle in time in the pro ranks on the men's tour just continue to be in the positive. Forever, it was negative 0.1 tour average forever. And I think I haven't seen the most recent one, but I think it's just a matter of time before average is level or maybe even favoring positive 1. Don't you think?
I think 100% that's accurate. Great point you brought up in the driver versus iron and the leaking over. And some of that, I think you have to also, so a couple of things to combat that. Number one, I would say, ideally, as much of the change you do via setup, that 80% we talked about, and the least amount you do in swing changes, usually is the easiest. So if all you have to worry about leaking over is the too much tilt piece, usually you can track it okay. And then in terms of the angle of attack, those guys on tour, when we look at tour numbers, and you know this, because they have so much speed, they can do whatever they want. Right. So like I swing about 115. I can hit down on it a degree or two and still hit it about 300 yards. But for the average golfer who swings it, I don't know how but what I see on TrackMan a lot is not even 100 miles an hour. I see a lot of 80 mile an hour, 90 mile an hour swings, right? So to me, at that point, you have less options. And I think if we looked at like elite high school players, middle school players, college players, women's players who don't have the speed as much, you would see the average angle of attack probably +2.
Right.
+2, +3 type of thing.
Yeah.
And I just think off the tee, it's like one of the core things I would have done different when I first started teaching and working with players, like there's so much of an advantage to gain off the tee for the average handicap player. And I think a lot of us, when we're working mechanics, default into iron swings and shorter swings. And there's a time and place for that. But like maximizing distance with a predictable one-way curve. Mm-hmm. Huge. Like to me, that should be priority 1A or 1B.
Yeah. I look back in my teaching over the last 21 years. I think in the last 15, I think I over-taught tilt a little bit, with the driver and that leaked into the iron. And so I think, I've kind of progressed with managing that spine a little bit better from driver to iron.
Yeah.
I've certainly, I'm more inclined in the changing of knee flex through the years. Always, allowing for some, but I think I allow for a lot more now, in my teaching, as we talked about with Tiger, so these are just like a couple of examples as you look back and as you evolve, right. And you learn, the driver versus iron discussion is fascinating. I go back to Stuart Sink. He wins, a couple times over the last year, and I'm reading his interview and he's like, yeah, picked up 10 degrees in my driver. Like, how'd you do that? I just tilt a little bit more, got my head behind it. It's like, duh.
Yeah.
I like that. In your head, you're thinking that. I interviewed James Seekman, who works with them. And it's just not that easy, right? Like, it's just not that easy with players to say, hey, just do a little bit more of this. And I've said this many times. And the reason is they push back. They push back and deservedly so. They're stubborn. Hey, I'm here. I'm on the PGA Tour. I am that 0.0001%.
Yeah.
So like you've got to be really sensitive to what's happening. And when you like, hey, let's do A and B. There we go. All right. And here's why. Because here's what the numbers say. Here's what the science says. It's not that easy. It pushed back. And that's where the coaching comes in, and and the element of positioning your words the right way for the player to evolve into it, yet not go backwards for 6 months, because they don't want to go backwards for 6 months. They won't go backwards for 3 months.
And I'm sure you do this when you first talk with someone too. To me, it's highly dependent on what the person's looking for.
Yeah.
So if a player comes into me and they say, hey, I'm a 20 handicap, I want to get down to a 10. I say, how far do you hit it? And they say 210. Right? We can just kind of look at some basic stats and some numbers. I'm like an analytical stats guy, which are often true, and say, hey, okay, well, we need to be able to do this. You need to be able to hit X far. You probably need to be able to hit about this per percentage greens. You got to get up and down about 30%, blah, 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 whatever those things are. And I would coach someone and have someone make those changes according to what they want to do.
Yeah.
So, at some point in time, the average distance someone hits it is a 1-to-1 correlation per their handicap.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a 1-to-1 correlation with greens and regulation, and then proximity to the hole, and then putting percentage, right? It all leaks down. So I'm with you. I think if we looked at 1 million golfers in the world and got their driver setups correct, first, it would resolve the greater, majority of issues, including grip.
Yeah, exactly. I think, absolutely make good points. The amateur player, mid handicap, I think you're definitely more inclined and have more runway to get in there and make those changes, and grip, posture, backswing. And I always like to put it in phases. I'm like, look, here's phase 1. If you just do the setup, you're probably going to improve the probability of impact just by changing the setup. Now, you may not do in the first 2 swings, but it's going to happen pretty quickly. Just stay with it. Just make sure you can quantify old versus new. Then it's like, okay, phase 2. Let's get this turning a little bit better. Let's get this club face a little bit, whatever it is. Again, it's going to improve the probability of impact. And here's why. So I think if you kind of piecemeal it, here's phase 1, here's phase 2, and then, okay. And then we just kind of build on top of that and not give them too much that they can't, give them enough where they can just bite off and have some success with and quantify and think about and not be overwhelmed.
Love that.
I think you have more of a runway there with the amateur player. I want to finish up with this here as we speak to the amateur player now, specifically on the downswing. We know you can get a lot of work done on the backswing. I've said it 1,000 times. The backswing has tremendous amount of value for amateur players. I know there's a lot of guys and women that you see on TV. They don't all look the same. I get it. But the reality is you take a mid-handicap player and you clean up some things that address in the backswing, it's going to make your life easier and the probability of things on the downswing. So let's assume we've got some things organized, like, okay, pretty good backswing, pretty good coming down. And now it's like, let's hit it. Let's get some rotation going with the hips and the torso and even the head swivel, these things that we got to open up, right? How do you start to dive into that with players?
Yeah, and I think just so that it's crystal clear, like what we just assumed are in there, right? Because we had on our site, I do a lot of online coaching traps. We have like 1,200 people in there that send in swings every month. So I see a lot of golf swings every single day. We spend a lot of time on what you just said. And I just like I need to make sure that the setup pieces. So when I look at rotation, I always go through 3 pieces, adding downswing rotation. Number 1, and I listened to your podcast you did with George, which I think was not long ago, which was super good. So that was awesome. The setup pieces that I learned from George in terms of balance points, huge impact on me. I think I first started learning that from him in like 2016 era. Getting the center of the hips over the center of the ankles and the back of the armpits over the balls of the feet completely revolutionized my ability to get someone to rotate. So that to me is always the first thing that I'll check.
Say that one more time.
So like at a setup, if I'm looking from down the line and you would draw a line, so if someone's recording themselves, you draw a line down the center of your hips and you want that to go about to the middle of your ankle. That'd be like about how far back or forward your butt should be. You typically want to see your butt a little more forward and underneath you. to aid rotation during the downswing. And then the back of the armpits, if you drew a straight line down, should run down to the balls of your feet, kind of like where your end of your shoelaces are on your feet. Kneecaps in line with that would be good. I learned that from George, completely revolutionized that. That'd be part one.
Okay.
Travis, 10% of people I see have that when I first see them.
Right.
So I'm doing that a lot. Number two, I would do would be club face angle. That applies to every good downswing thing. So face angle that is square to or close to the path. And so a player can just look at that if they can see this with the toe relative to the heel. So anytime the toe gets behind the heel, we'll call that an open club face. Anytime the toe is on top, we'll call that square. And anytime it's in front, we'll call that closed. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at if you're looking at a video of your swing during the downswing and you got the toe behind the heel, we'll call that open. Odds of your body rotating from there are very slim because you're going to pump it way to the right. So your body's going to stop to be able to fix that. That's always step two for me. And then step three would be the shaft and arm positioning. So the more the club head gets behind your hands or just behind your body or from inside, your body needs to get that club back in front of you. And it wants to do that through rotation mainly. So I would do those three steps. And that doesn't answer your question at all, but just to make sure I would have those prerequisites. Assuming we have all of those in, to me, then there's two options. If I'm with someone in person, I would like to get in there and move them. Similar to what George does, you can just get things done a lot faster. Mm-hmm. If I can't physically move someone, then there's a couple different things I would go about doing. I really like some of the stick drills. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this, I again, from George, like from the rotation pieces, something as simple as like you put a stick through your belt loops, you put a stick on the ground about 45 degrees left of your heel line, and you're trying to feel as though the stick in your belt loops get over the stick on the ground by impact. Key point, by impact.
Right. So that stick really, moving behind the player. And trying to get open when they hit it.
Open sooner relative to where their arms and hands are at.
Right.
If I would run someone through, Travis, and they have all those prerequisites that I mentioned, and they did some form of like stick drill or whatever rotation drill you want, and they still couldn't get rotation, which happens, then I would go more like athletic. Mm-hmm. So I would try and put pieces in earlier during the backswing to try and create more of a reaction. Okay. And there'd be like step drills, things on those lines.
Right. Yeah, the step drill helps. Yeah, the step drill helps. I tend not to get enough pressure going forward. I'll tend to get, kind of not enough forward. But when I get that step, then I can use that to open up. I see a lot of players who, when they start getting those things in line, I think the old way of teaching, George and I have talked about this many times, is the hips kind of bump laterally, the knees kind of pinch together, and then your spine kind of hangs back in right bend. And like you can't rotate when your pelvis is that far forward and your spine's back. You can't use the ground to rotate. So you're kind of stuck, right? The club tends to exit more down the line and a little higher. So I think getting some spacing, in the knees in transition seems to really help people understand, like, okay, now my pelvis is kind of more underneath me and my spine's in less right bend. Okay, now I can grip the ground better and I can open up, I can rotate. So I find myself kind of teaching that with some spacing between the knees, a little split in the knees. And it's interesting, like if this was my right knee and this is my right, left, like it feels like they kind of, go like this almost. Yeah. And this feeling goes like, it's like this the right knee just stabilizes as the left opens. Like the left hip is opening, and this feels like it's just kind of peeling away from this rather than laterally launching that way. And then the spine being, kind of left behind. So that's a very different concept and feel for people. But once they kind of feel like, okay, yeah, my pelvis is under me, I'm more plugged in, that hasn't outraced me so much. Like, okay, now I can get that stick around and that left shoulder around. I don't feel like I'm so much this way and more this way. Now the handle can get under that stick that you're holding just above me, right? And the club can exit kind of now underneath my shoulder rather than so high.
I think that, 100%, dude. Some of those pieces, keeping the left side of the pelvis lower than the right during the first half of the downswing has been really big for me, helping people.
Right.
Getting the femur or like the left kneecap working more externally, or like the kneecap towards the target sooner type of feels.
Right.
And then using the feet to push in opposite directions. Listen, I think you see both ends of the spectrum. You know, like there's some high handicap players who come in who arm and hand path is way out, and they have tour level rotation, and their path is 15 left.
Right.
You know, and then you got to kind of dial those people back in.
Right.
And I think it's all relative. Like I have some of those issues that you mentioned where I was taught, you know, back when you and I were probably really playing a lot more shift, a lot more tilt, right, to make sure you swing from inside. So I have some of that creeps into my swing still. But that for a lot of people would be a good problem.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's all relative. You make a good point. The question was, you know, in rotation, and you set it up beautifully with the prerequisites of what needs to be happening. The reality of those prereqs are what we're working on probably the majority of the time.
Yeah.
And then as we clean those things up, rotation starts to subconsciously start to just become more free.
Do you find, Travis, I did some breaking 80 videos, right?
Yeah.
The premise of it was like, if I could never see a golfer and I could teach them step by step, I would almost always, again, I couldn't see their swing. I'd almost always teach them club face first. So like learn to close the face to path, curve it left. I'd teach them path second. So that would help start it right, curve it left. And then I'd teach them rotation and pivot third.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's great.
I think that's a very logical order. I think we went through a phase there was like in social media, this whole phase of like, you got to open up, get open. It's like, yep. But let's pump the brakes a little bit before we just start spinning open, right? Because getting open is kind of a luxury deal, you know, like you have to kind of work towards that.
Dude, perfectly said. And you know, from talking to George, and like you and I both play this, you know, the social media, YouTube, Instagram game where like there's a difference between what really gets taught during real lessons and the kind of the videos that get posted.
Right.
So if I post up a bunch of like shallow and shaft videos day after day after day after day, I might only give a shallow shaft lesson 1 out of 10. Yeah, like it all depends on who's in front of you. And I see equal amount of people who don't need more rotation as do. But it's very handicap specific.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, there's no question. Yeah, there's no question. Because you can't just have a guy spin and open in his path 10 to the left. I mean,
it's not functional.
You can't have someone taking the club head way inside and then coming down over the top and spinning left. Like there's things to work on well before that. And then as you start getting those things, then you can open up. I was talking to Jeff Smith probably over the summer, and we were having this conversation coming down. He was like, you know what? And I think I'm quoting him correctly. Like he's like, I don't even really teach that much rotation coming down. I just kind of let them go, you know, like rotational freedom. We get things in line. Now hit it, open up.
And
here, you know, and then sometimes you get in there and you got to move them, and you know, but it's like you just kind of get them to where you can just give them the context and then let them open up. And I tend to agree with that. I feel like that's probably more where I am. And there's times to put the stick and those things, but it's like, okay, let me just give you a little context on this side and where I want the club to exit. And here we go.
And I think ideally we would all like to be as minimally invasive as possible.
Yeah.
That'd be ideal. And I think it depends, you know, it depends on the client and the player too. Like Jeff, now I don't talk to Jeff, so I don't know, I'm assuming, but I see his Instagram posts. There's studs rolling through there, right?
Yeah.
Like Jeff works with studs.
Yep.
And so typically when I'm trying to have someone get rotation, shaft, lean, distance, whatever, the higher level the player, the easier it is. The more they're going to either A, have those pieces in before, or B, talent their way through figuring it out.
Right.
Now, as time has shifted for me, I used to spend all my time with high level players. Now, like I said, I see 1,000 swings a month. Most of them they're trying to get better. And the higher handicap player, when you need to shove some things in there, like you really, 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 really have to make sure those prerequisites are in there with those higher handicap players.
Yeah, for sure.
Like there's no skipping that.
I think going back to the order that you put together, I would say, yeah, club face would be number one. I think I would put 1A, a little bit of swing shape going back. You know, I like to clean up the inside, take away the hand path working too far away. You know, I like to get things kind of organized initially up to the top. So then, okay, now the face is better. Now the club face is good. We've got a good swing shape toward now this change of direction, this shaft. wants and is being promoted to shallow out a little bit. So it's like, that's kind of 1A, you know, and then it's like, okay, now he's got the face going. And then it's like, all right, now a little bit of, like you said, further development of the path.
Yeah, I like that.
And then as the body's getting in the way of that, then if it gets in the way, then we'll get in there and clean up the body too. Like, okay, he's swaying, he's reversed. Okay, okay, I got to get the body to, because it's in the way. If it's not, I'll just kind of let it go, you know. And then if it is in the way, then I'll get in there and, you know, and get it right.
Exactly.
And then, you know, with that, I think you kind of slowly just, okay, yeah, as much speed as we can as we're doing that. I'm not going to sacrifice closing the face more and trying to get them to load up more if they're still rotating that face too open. Like, it's, you know, like there's the order of the madness here. So I think, yeah, you're wanting to speed it up some too. And there's times to do that, but you got to be careful that, yeah, let's get the face good, let's get the path good. And then the body's kind of molding around that, and we can just kind of speed it up as we go. And pretty soon, yeah, that level, that skill set just starts to improve, and it's conducive from a wedge to the driver. And they're like, man, I can hit all my clubs now. And I've got the curve at a minimum, and my misses are better. My good shots are longer and straighter. And then that progression just continues to go. So yeah, it's good stuff, man. We could talk forever on this, you know, but it is that context. And I think about, I'll finish with this. I think about it a lot on my Instagram and the stuff that I'm doing in speaking to that 85%. And I always say the 85% are those that don't show up on the lesson tee. You know, it's the 15 that do. That's easy. They're right in front of you. As a teacher, if you can't move that person in the right direction, that's on you. It's the 85% that are not right in front of you. You know, they're consuming it right here. It's like, how can I entertain that person, educate that person, and provide the context for that person to improve? That's what I think about that all the time, because that 85% is vital to this industry and showing up. And it's just, you know, hey, it's just what it is. Time, resources, kids, life. I mean, there's a lot of shit going on. I mean, like, you know, I don't have time to go take a lesson. I'd love to go get a massage every week. I don't have time, you know? So it's like, so we have to speak to them too. But yet, you know, get in their head in a way that's, man, that makes sense. That context makes sense for me. Like we've done today. That's for me. That's for me. And all of a sudden, oh, wow. You get it all the time in your DMs. You know, like I saw someone sent me a DM the other day and said that their goal was to break 90. And, you know, he's been watching my stuff. He does my training programs. He's never sent me an online lesson though. And he shot, what did he say? He shot like 78 or something. I'm just like, wow. Yeah. You know, like it just like goosebumps. It makes you feel good, right? Like they're doing the training programs. The context is there. They're following it. And he goes from shooting, you know, goal of breaking 90, he shot 78 and he's through the roof. It's like, man, that makes you feel good. If we can get more and more of those 85% doing that, like, then we're ready to go. And that's a big, big deal. Don't you agree?
Dude, big time. And I think last point for me on that is like, I golf this, I'm trying to make a point to play once a week. There's a long period of time where I would coach, not play, and you lose perspective. I played this weekend, right? And the three guys I played with all shot kind of in the mid 90s. And these are guys that don't take less than the same sort of thing. And you start to see what the biggest issues are. And when we're communicating with golfers that we don't see who don't take lessons, I think one really important thing for us is always to contextualize what we're talking about or what outcome it's going to be associated with. So if I'm walking someone through that, hey, close the face to path first, fix the path second, do the body third, I'm going to say, hey, listen, we're going to do this wrist thing, whatever it is. The point is to close the club face so that when you hit the ball, it's going to curve left. So when you're golfing, I can just be like, okay, I'm kind of feeling this move, curve left. That's it. That's all I'm worried about, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever move it is. I think we lose people in golf is when we're like, hey, your right elbow should be here at this point with no conceptualization of this is to hit it more solid, hit it higher, hit it lower. Like what's going to actually happen with this thing I'm working on?
Yeah.
And those players that shot in the 90s, dude, they need the basics. Hit the ball reasonably solid.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That'd be a good start, right? Like part one, eliminate the big miss. So like, I think as long as we're always working on things within like, what am I going to get with this? What is the point of this? One big picture concept at a time.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, fade the ball less. Okay. To only do that within whatever you're working on until you get it. Right. And then kind of move on to the next piece. I think that's big for those 85% too.
Yeah, it's big. I love it, man.
Yeah.
Eric Cogorno, just like the pizza, right? That's what you told me to say.
Like Cogorno pizza, man.
You're the man. Hey, you got great videos on YouTube, Instagram. I know we were talking before we came on, maybe another little run here across the country, working with some of the top teachers and videos. So go check those out on his YouTube. Lots of great info there. And man, this is great. Thanks for coming on the pod. Happy Thanksgiving, buddy.
Yeah, Travis, thanks, man. I'm glad all was well with you and the family.